He let the Apache girl in from the cold, and realized too late it wasn't that simple. The wind blew across the open Arizona plains like a cold, restless spirit, cutting through the smallest cracks in doors and windows. John, a man in his early 40s, lived alone on his small ranch, miles away from the nearest town. His life was simple, marked by routines he had followed for years: feeding the horses, checking the fences, repairing anything broken in the cabin, and sometimes sitting by the fireplace with a book. He was a solitary man, content in his own company, the kind of person who found comfort in the quiet rhythm of his days. That afternoon, as he stepped outside to check the horses, he noticed a thin, shadowy figure at the edge of his property. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the wind or a passing animal. But as he squinted through the blowing snow, he realized it was a young girl, no older than 12 or 13, with dark hair plastered to her face from the snow and cold. She was shivering, her small frame trembling against the icy wind. Her clothes were thin and clearly not made for the harsh winter, and her boots were worn out, leaking the cold right through to her feet. John's heart tightened. He had seen people in distress before, but something about this girl made him pause. She wasn't just lost. She seemed scared, cautious, as if she had been running from something. The ranch was isolated, but he knew he couldn't just watch her struggle in the cold. He called out gently, "Hey there, are you okay?" His voice was calm but firm, carrying over the whistling wind. The girl froze, her eyes wide and alert. She took a small step back, as if unsure whether she could trust him. John noticed the fear in her gaze, the quick, nervous movements, and the way she hugged herself tightly for warmth. He slowly approached her, keeping his hands visible and his tone soothing. "It's all right. You don't have to be scared. I won't hurt you. Come inside, get warm." For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, hesitantly, she took a step toward him. Her movements were stiff, cautious, like she had learned from experience not to trust strangers easily. John held the door open, and she stepped inside the small cabin, leaving a trail of snow behind her. The warm air hit her first, and she gasped, a tiny sound that seemed to release some of the tension in her body. John offered her a blanket, and she took it without speaking, pulling it around herself as if it were a shield. He guided her to the chair by the fireplace, where the flames danced and crackled, filling the room with a golden warmth. John went to the kitchen and boiled water for tea, and the aroma of warm bread soon followed. The girl watched him silently, her dark eyes cautious but curious. She didn't speak at first, and John didn't push her. He knew better than to force someone to open up when they weren't ready. Finally, after a few minutes of silence, she muttered her name, Yana. It was soft, barely audible over the fire's crackle. John nodded gently, introducing himself as well. "I'm John. You can stay here as long as you need. You're safe now." The words felt heavy and important as he said them, almost like a promise he intended to keep. Over the next hour, Ayana slowly began to relax. She ate some bread and sipped the warm tea John had made. Her hands, red and stiff from the cold, started to regain some feeling, and the tension in her shoulders eased. John watched her carefully, trying to understand more about who she was and how she had ended up in this storm. But Ayana's silence made it clear that she was still protecting herself, still guarding secrets that were hers alone. John went back to his routine as best he could, tending to the small chores that needed attention, but his mind kept returning to the girl. Who was she? Where did she come from? And more importantly, why was she alone in this cold, unforgiving place? He had lived in Arizona all his life and knew that children rarely wandered so far from help unless something serious had driven them away. His instincts told him that Ayana's story would not be simple, that it would be complicated, perhaps even painful. As the hours passed, the snowstorm outside grew stronger, battering the cabin with icy fingers. John decided that she should stay the night. He cleared a small space in the corner with blankets and a pillow, making a little bed for her near the fireplace. Ayanna hesitated but eventually climbed into the makeshift bed, curling up under the blankets. John gave her a reassuring nod, then moved to his own bed across the cabin, though sleep was slow to come. He lay awake, listening to the wind, thinking about the girl and the dangers that might have chased her here. The night stretched on, long and cold. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the cabin walls, but inside, there was a fragile sense of safety. For a brief moment, Ayanna allowed herself to relax, to feel warmth and protection she had not known in a long time. John, despite his solitude, felt a strange sense of connection. This small, scared girl had unexpectedly entered his life, and though he did not know the full story, he knew he could not turn away. By the time morning came, the storm had eased slightly. Light filtered through the frost-covered windows, casting a soft glow across the room. Ayanna stirred, blinking at the sunlight and the warmth of the fire. John prepared breakfast, and this time, Ayanna ate a little more, talking in short sentences, answering his gentle questions with one-word responses. It was a start, a tiny bridge being built between two people from completely different worlds. As they sat together, John realized that he could not simply let her leave, not yet. The world outside was harsh and unforgiving, and Ayanna was clearly vulnerable. But he also knew that helping her would not be easy. There would be questions, perhaps from authorities, perhaps from neighbors. There would be dangers he could not yet see, but for now none of that mattered. What mattered was that a small girl had found shelter from the cold, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, she had a safe place to rest. John understood that this was just the beginning. The first steps in a story that would challenge both of them in ways neither could yet imagine. But he also knew that kindness, no matter how small, could change the course of a life. And so, he decided silently that he would protect Ayanna for as long as he could, not knowing that the road ahead would be far more complicated than he could ever anticipate. The days that followed the storm were bright but cold, and the snow still clung stubbornly to the edges of the ranch. John woke early, as usual, and went about his morning chores, but now he had a small, quiet presence in the cabin that shifted the rhythm of his day. Ayanna was no longer just a stranger who had stumbled into his life. She had become someone he felt responsible for. Watching her eat breakfast, slowly and carefully, John realized that a small act of kindness could change someone's life in ways he had never expected. Ayanna moved cautiously around the cabin, observing everything with quiet curiosity. She had a sharp mind, quick to notice small details, and often asked questions about simple things, like why John fed the horses first thing in the morning or why the fire needed tending. He answered patiently, explaining each task in simple words. She listened intently, sometimes nodding, sometimes frowning in thought, and gradually a small bond began to form. John noticed that she smiled occasionally, a shy, fleeting smile that made his heart warm despite the cold outside. One afternoon, as the wind howled through the trees lining the property, Ayanna approached John while he was repairing a broken fence post. She held a small notebook in her hands. "I write things," she said softly, almost as if speaking the words out loud made them real. John looked at her, curious. "Write things?" he asked. She nodded, opening the notebook to show him sketches of the ranch, the horses, and even a small map of the surrounding area. The drawings were simple but careful, each line revealing her attention to detail and her quiet intelligence. John felt a deep respect for her. She was more than a scared child. She was thoughtful, creative, and resourceful. As the days passed, John noticed small changes in Ayanna. She began to trust him more, sharing little stories about her past in broken sentences. She had grown up on a nearby reservation and had a family, though her relationship with them was complicated. She spoke of her siblings and a grandmother who had cared for her, but also of arguments and strict rules that made her feel trapped. John listened without judgment, offering gentle encouragement when she struggled to find the right words. The girl's vulnerability touched him deeply, but it also made him aware of the fragile line he was walking. She had come to him for safety, and he needed to be careful not to break that trust. One morning, a few days after the storm, John took Ayanna out to the stable to feed the horses. The sky was clear, and the sun reflected off the snow, casting a bright glow across the landscape. Ayanna watched the horses with wide, curious eyes. John handed her a bucket of oats and guided her hands as she fed the animals. "You see," he said gently, "horses understand kindness. They respond to patience and care." Ayanna nodded, her small hands moving carefully, almost reverently, as she scattered the oats. The horses nudged her gently, and for a moment she laughed, a soft, light sound that seemed to carry all the joy of freedom. John felt a small surge of happiness. It was the first time he had seen her truly at ease, and he cherished it. But as much as Ayanna began to settle into the rhythm of the ranch, shadows of her past began to creep in. One afternoon, John found her staring out the window, her expression tense and worried. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting beside her. She hesitated, then whispered, "They might be looking for me." John's heart sank. He had suspected that there were people searching for her, but hearing it spoken aloud made the danger real. "Who?" he asked cautiously. She didn't answer, just shook her head. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, and John realized that her life was far more complicated than he had imagined. She wasn't just a runaway seeking warmth and shelter. She was a child caught between worlds, running from something she didn't yet fully understand herself. John decided to tread carefully. He didn't want to scare her, but he also knew that he needed to prepare for the possibility that someone would come looking. He began to teach Ayanna basic safety measures without alarming her, showing her how to stay out of sight if needed, and explaining that some people might not understand her situation. She listened attentively, absorbing every word like a student eager to learn. Despite the seriousness of their conversations, there were still moments of normal childhood joy, laughing as they tried to catch snowflakes on their tongues, helping him repair the cabin, and sharing quiet meals by the fire. One evening, as they sat together after supper, Ayanna asked a question that surprised John. "Why did you let me in?" she asked softly. John thought for a moment, watching the flickering flames in the fireplace. "Because no one should be out in the cold alone," he said finally. She nodded, but there was more in her eyes, a mix of gratitude and caution, as if she understood the kindness but also the complexities it carried. John realized that his decision, simple as it had seemed at the time, had set in motion a chain of events neither of them fully understood. Neighbors began to notice the girl around the ranch, though she kept mostly to the cabin. Some were curious, others cautious. John tried to explain carefully that she was a guest, someone in need of help, but he sensed judgment in some of the quiet whispers. In a small, tight-knit community, people noticed differences and sometimes feared them. John understood, but he also felt a quiet determination to protect Ayanna. She had trusted him, and he could not betray that trust. As the days turned into weeks, Ayanna began to open up more. She shared small details about her family, her dreams, and the things she missed from the reservation, running freely through the forests, listening to her grandmother's stories, the taste of her favorite foods. John listened, fascinated, and sometimes offered small advice, gently helping her navigate her emotions. Their bond deepened, built on trust, care, and shared experiences. John felt a mix of joy and concern, knowing that the outside world was waiting, and that their fragile peace could be disrupted at any moment. One afternoon, John took Ayanna on a small walk around the property, showing her the hidden spots where deer often came to drink water and the small creek that ran behind the ranch. She moved carefully but with growing confidence, her earlier fear slowly melting into curiosity and wonder. They talked quietly about simple things, the beauty of the snow, the patterns of birds in the sky, the way sunlight sparkled on the frost. In those moments, the world seemed gentle, and the troubles of the past felt distant. John treasured these moments, knowing they were precious and fleeting, but the undercurrent of danger never fully left. John noticed that Ayanna sometimes flinched at distant sounds, and there were nights when she stared out the window, lost in thought. He could sense the weight of her experiences pressing down on her young shoulders. He realized that helping her was not just about providing warmth and food. It was about patience, understanding, and the courage to face unknown challenges together. Each day brought small victories, a smile, a story shared, a laugh, a moment of trust. But each day also reminded him that their situation was delicate, and a single misstep could change everything. Despite the challenges, John found himself deeply moved by Ayanna's resilience. She was a survivor in every sense, navigating a world that had often been unkind with a mixture of caution, intelligence, and quiet courage. He admired her determination and the way she held onto hope, even in moments of fear. And as he watched her sleep peacefully by the fire one night, he felt a profound sense of responsibility and care. He knew that the days ahead would be complicated, but he also knew that he would face them with patience and steadfastness. The bond between them, fragile yet strong, became the heart of the ranch. Ayanna was no longer just a guest. She was a part of the small, quiet world that John had built over years of solitude. Their days were filled with small joys and careful lessons, moments of laughter and moments of reflection. Each day, John saw more of the brave, thoughtful girl she was, and he felt a growing commitment to protect her, even when he did not fully understand the challenges that lay ahead. And in those winter days, as the sun set over the snow-covered plains, John realized something important. Helping someone in need was never simple. It was complicated, challenging, and sometimes frightening, but it was also deeply rewarding. And he knew, without a doubt, that he had chosen the right path, even if he could not yet see where it would lead. Days turned into weeks, and the winter slowly began to loosen its grip on the Arizona plains. Snow melted in small patches, revealing the brown grass beneath, but the air remained sharp, reminding John and Ayanna that the cold had not fully passed. Life on the ranch had settled into a routine, and yet the quiet moments were always tinged with a sense of unease. John could see it in Ayanna's eyes, the way she sometimes froze at distant sounds or stared off into the horizon, lost in thought. He knew that her past was more complicated than she had shared, and that the storm which had brought her to his door was only the beginning of her journey. One afternoon, John returned from checking the far fence line to find Ayanna sitting quietly on the porch, wrapped in a thick blanket. She was sketching in her notebook again, her hands steady despite the chilly wind. He noticed that her drawings had changed. They were no longer just landscapes or animals, but small, intricate symbols and maps, some marking paths through the hills and forests nearby. John's curiosity got the better of him, and he asked gently, "What are these for?" Ayanna paused, biting her lip, and finally whispered, "Just places I've been." Her voice was soft, almost secretive. John nodded, respecting her silence, but the subtle warning in her tone did not escape him. She had been running before, and he realized she might still be running, from what he could not yet know. That evening, as the sky turned a pale orange, a distant sound carried across the ranch, a vehicle engine faint but persistent. Ayanna stiffened instantly, her hand gripping the blanket. John, noticing her fear, put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You're safe here. I'll make sure of it." She nodded but did not relax. The incident reminded John that the outside world was waiting, watching, and that their peace could be disrupted at any moment. He began to understand that helping her would be far more complicated than providing shelter and warmth. Ayanna's life was intertwined with people and circumstances he could not yet see. Over the next few days, small clues about her past started to emerge. Yana mentioned her grandmother in fleeting phrases, recalling how she had taught her to read the stars and to respect the land. She spoke of her siblings with a mix of affection and frustration, hinting at conflicts and rules she had not agreed with. John listened carefully, piecing together a fragile image of a life shaped by love and strict boundaries, by kindness and harsh discipline. He realized that Ayana had been forced to navigate complicated relationships from a very young age, learning to survive through caution, cleverness, and resilience. And he admired her for it, though he felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier with each revelation. One morning, John found Ayana standing at the edge of the barnyard, looking toward the distant road. She seemed troubled, hesitant to speak, as though she feared that saying anything aloud might change the moment. Finally she asked, "Do they know I'm here?" John felt a pang of concern. "Who?" he asked carefully. She shook her head, silent for a long moment before whispering, people who look for me." He realized then that the danger was not just abstract, it was real and possibly very close. He needed to be ready, not only for himself but for her. It was clear that Ayana's life outside the ranch was filled with people who might misunderstand her, who might act without knowing her story, and he knew that protecting her would require more than kindness. It would require strategy, patience, and courage. As the days grew longer, John tried to maintain the illusion of normalcy. They worked together on small projects around the ranch, repairing fences, cleaning the barn, and feeding the animals. Gianna had begun to understand the rhythm of ranch life, helping without being told, observing quietly, and learning quickly. She seemed to find comfort in these routines, yet there were moments when her gaze would drift toward the horizon, and John could sense that memories or fears were surfacing that she could not yet share. He decided to be patient, knowing that trust took time and that her story would unfold at its own pace. One evening, after a day of chores, they sat by the fireplace together, the orange glow casting shadows across the cabin. Gianna drew in her notebook, while John quietly repaired a broken hinge on the kitchen door. She looked up suddenly, hesitating before asking, "Do you ever get scared?" John paused, considering the question. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but fear doesn't always mean you stop. It just means you have to be careful." She nodded thoughtfully, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and John realized that despite her young age, she had faced far more fear than most adults ever would. Her courage was quiet, unspoken, but profound. But life on the ranch was not without challenges. One morning, John discovered that some supplies he had stored in the barn were missing, nothing valuable, just food and tools, but enough to make him wary. At first, he thought perhaps one of the horses had knocked something over. But then he noticed footprints in the soft mud near the barn, footprints that did not belong to him. He realized that someone had been close to the cabin, watching. His heart tightened as he thought of Ayana. She had come to him for safety, and now, it seemed, that safety might be threatened. He decided to be more vigilant, checking the perimeter regularly and teaching Ayana subtle ways to stay aware of her surroundings without frightening her. Despite these growing concerns, small moments of connection continued to shine through. One afternoon, Ayana helped John plant a small vegetable garden in the patch of soil freed from the snow. She laughed as dirt smeared her hands, and John found himself smiling at the simplicity of the moment. They talked about seeds, growth, and the patience required to tend to living things. For a few hours, the outside world, the dangers, and the complexities of her past faded away. It was just the two of them, working together, sharing a small piece of the world in quiet harmony. John realized that these moments were precious, that they were the foundation of the trust and bond they had built. Yet, beneath these peaceful moments, John could not ignore the growing tension. Letters had started arriving at the ranch for Ayana, addressed to the nearest post office. John carefully intercepted them, recognizing that some were likely from family members, while others might be from authorities. Ayanna noticed them occasionally, her expression shifting between curiosity and fear. She asked questions indirectly, never directly confronting the contents, and John answered with gentle honesty without revealing too much. He wanted her to feel secure, but he also knew that he could not shield her from everything forever. One night, as snow lightly dusted the ground once more, a sudden noise outside startled them both, a branch snapping underfoot, perhaps an animal, perhaps something else. Ayanna's small body tensed instantly, and John instinctively moved to stand in front of her. The sound passed, leaving only the soft whisper of the wind, but John realized that their fragile sense of safety was always at risk. He knew that he needed to prepare her for the real world, teaching her how to recognize danger, how to stay calm, and how to make decisions under pressure. It was a difficult lesson, one that required patience, understanding, and a delicate balance between protection and independence. Through all of this, John observed a remarkable resilience in Ayanna. She was clever, resourceful, and quietly brave. She learned quickly, adapted to new situations, and even found moments of joy despite the uncertainties surrounding her. John found himself admiring her spirit, inspired by her ability to face each day with courage. At the same time, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Protecting her was no longer just about providing warmth and shelter. It was about helping her navigate a world filled with complexities she did not fully understand. The weeks on the ranch continued in this rhythm of quiet work, small joys, and underlying tension. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities to strengthen their bond. John realized that life with Ayanna would never be simple. It was a journey filled with unexpected turns, with moments of fear, hope, and courage intertwined. And as he watched her sleep one night, the fire casting a warm glow across the cabin, he knew that whatever lay ahead, he would face it with patience, wisdom, and an unwavering commitment to her well-being. In those days, John understood something profound. Life was rarely simple, and helping someone in need required more than just good intentions. It required courage, vigilance, and a deep understanding of human complexity. Ayanna's story was far from over, and he could sense that the days ahead would bring challenges he had never imagined. But he also knew that their bond, built on trust, compassion, and shared experiences, would guide them through whatever came next. And with that understanding, he felt a quiet determination settle in his heart, an unspoken promise to protect her, guide her, and stand by her side, no matter what the future held. The days following the small hints of danger brought a quiet tension into the cabin. John could feel it in the way Ayanna moved, the way she sometimes flinched at a distant sound, or how her eyes scanned the horizon as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Though she had grown more confident in her surroundings, the weight of her past and the uncertainty of the outside world lingered like a shadow over every moment of peace. John realized that the sanctuary he had built for her, though strong in intention, was fragile in reality. One morning, as the sun rose in pale gold over the snow-dusted plains, John discovered that Ayanna had left a note on the kitchen table. It was short, written in her careful, small handwriting. "I need to understand. I cannot hide forever." His heart tightened. The words were honest, full of courage, and yet they carried the weight of fear and determination. She was beginning to realize that the life she had sought on the ranch, though comforting and safe, could not erase the complications of her past. She needed answers, and she needed to face some of the challenges she had been running from. John sat down beside the note, thinking carefully about what to do. He knew that protecting Ayanna meant balancing her need for freedom with her safety. Over the next few hours, he watched her quietly as she moved about the cabin, organizing her belongings, sketching maps, and occasionally staring out at the distant hills. He noticed her hesitation whenever she considered stepping outside, her cautious nature clashing with a growing desire to take control of her own life. It was clear that Ayana's journey was no longer just about shelter. It was about understanding herself, her family, and the forces that had driven her to seek refuge in the first place. That afternoon, John decided to talk to her openly. "Yana," he began gently, "I know you're wondering about the world outside this cabin. You're not wrong to feel that way, but there are things you need to be careful of and things I need to know to help you." She looked up, her dark eyes wide, and nodded slowly. He continued, "You're strong and brave, but there are people who might not understand your story. We have to think about the next steps carefully." She listened, silent but attentive, and John felt a quiet hope that she was beginning to trust him completely. The next few days were filled with preparation. John taught Ayana small but important lessons: how to stay aware of her surroundings, how to notice when someone unfamiliar approached, and how to respond calmly to unexpected situations. Yana absorbed every word, sometimes asking questions, sometimes quietly reflecting. John could see that she was learning quickly, but he also realized that her growing awareness brought with it a new burden: the knowledge that danger was not just a story but a reality she would have to face. One morning, the quiet tension of the ranch erupted unexpectedly. Ayana's notebook, the one in which she had recorded maps and sketches, had been moved. John noticed immediately, and the two of them searched the cabin together. The notebook was gone. Panic and fear swelled in Ayana's chest, and John felt a rush of protectiveness like never before. Whoever had taken it might have been looking for clues, for information, or perhaps just attempting to intimidate her. The realization made it clear that their sanctuary was not invincible and that the outside world could reach them even here. After calming her, John sat down with Ayana and spoke gently. "We need to be careful. I don't know who took it, but we need to think ahead and protect ourselves." Ayana nodded, tears welling in her eyes but also a determined spark igniting within her. The experience reminded both of them that their life together, though comforting and filled with trust, could not shield them from all risks. They needed courage, planning, and mutual understanding to navigate the challenges ahead. Over the next few days, John observed changes in Ayana. She became more cautious but also more thoughtful, weighing her actions and considering consequences. He noticed her growing independence, the way she moved through the cabin, handled chores, and even interacted with the horses without needing direction. Yet he also noticed her occasional moments of hesitation, the times when she would pause by the window and gaze toward the horizon as if weighing a difficult decision. John realized that part of growing up, especially under unusual circumstances, was learning to balance fear with action. And Ayana was learning this, slowly, carefully, and courageously. One evening, as the winter sun dipped behind the distant hills, a visitor arrived at the edge of the property. A man on horseback, unfamiliar to John, stopped near the fence and called out politely. John's pulse quickened, but he greeted the visitor calmly. The man explained that he was looking for a young girl who had recently been reported missing from a nearby reservation. John could see Ayana tense behind him, her eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. He knew that the time had come to make difficult choices. Protecting her was no longer just about warmth and food. It was about honesty, judgment, and responsibility. John spoke to the man carefully, without revealing too much, and assured him that he was committed to ensuring Ayana's safety. The man seemed reasonable but firm, and it became clear that the situation was far more complicated than John had anticipated. Ayana's past, her family, and the authorities were now intersecting with her current life, creating a network of challenges that could not be ignored. John realized that he could no longer shield her completely. He needed to help her navigate these realities, to prepare her for the possibility of separation, confrontation, or even difficult truths about her family. That night after the visitor had left, John and Ayanna sat by the fire. The cabin was warm, but the tension hung in the air. Ayanna's hands trembled slightly as she held her sketchbook, and John could see the mix of fear and determination in her eyes. "I don't want to go back," she whispered. John reached out and took her hand gently. "I know," he said softly, "but whatever happens, we will face it together. I will help you make the best choice for yourself." She nodded, her trust in him evident, but the weight of reality pressed heavily on both of them. The next days were filled with preparation, discussion, and careful planning. John helped Ayanna organize her belongings, teaching her to consider both safety and comfort. They practiced small routines for vigilance, how to respond if someone came unexpectedly, how to communicate quietly, and how to make decisions calmly under pressure. Ayanna absorbed the lessons quickly, but John could see that each step brought its own emotional challenge. She was beginning to understand the complexity of her situation, the delicate balance between freedom, safety, and the obligations of the world outside the ranch. Through it all, moments of connection and understanding continued to shine through. They worked together in the barn, tended the garden, and shared quiet meals by the fire. John noticed Ayanna's growing confidence, the way she approached tasks with thoughtfulness, the way she asked questions, and the way she sometimes smiled with genuine joy. Yet beneath these moments, a deeper understanding was forming. Ayanna was beginning to see that life was not simple, that kindness could bring responsibility, and that trust carried both comfort and risk. John realized that he, too, was learning these lessons alongside her, the delicate art of guidance, patience, and careful decision-making. One particularly cold morning, a new letter arrived at the post office, addressed to Ayanna. John opened it carefully, reading the words before deciding how to explain the contents to her. The letter was from her grandmother, expressing concern and love, but also urging her to return home. John handed it to Ayanna gently. She read it slowly, her face a mixture of longing, sadness, and uncertainty. John did not rush her, understanding that she needed time to process the emotions the letter stirred. He saw the internal struggle in her eyes, the desire for freedom, the pull of family, and the awareness that choices had consequences. It was a moment of growth, a reminder that life was rarely straightforward, and that every decision carried weight. As the days passed, John observed Ayanna making small, thoughtful decisions on her own. She began to take more responsibility for her actions, weighing risks and benefits, and considering the emotions of those around her. She learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. John felt proud, but also aware of the challenges still ahead. The world outside the ranch was waiting, and though they had built a fragile sanctuary together, it could not last forever. Preparing Ayanna for the next stage of her journey became his most important task, a task that required patience, wisdom, and unwavering care. In the quiet moments by the fire, John reflected on the journey so far. He had learned that helping someone in need was never simple. It required more than good intentions. It demanded vigilance, understanding, and the courage to face consequences. Ayanna had taught him lessons about resilience, trust, and the complexity of human life. And though the days ahead promised challenges, he felt a quiet determination settle in his heart. Whatever happened next, he would face it with patience, compassion, and steadfast commitment to her well-being. Spring was beginning to creep over the Arizona plains. Patches of green were appearing beneath the melting snow, and the air carried a gentle warmth that had been absent for months. The days were longer, and the sun's golden light reflected off the small streams and puddles that had formed in the fields. Life on the ranch had regained a rhythm, but beneath the calm, John and Ayanna knew that the time of uncertainty was drawing near. The outside world, the family, the authorities, and the consequences of her choices, was approaching, and both of them could feel the weight of it. One morning, Yana woke early, quietly slipping from her small bed near the fireplace. She moved toward the window, her dark eyes scanning the distant road as if trying to memorize every detail. John watched her in silence for a moment. He understood her feelings more deeply than ever. The cabin had been a place of safety, warmth, and trust, but it had also been a temporary shelter from the realities that awaited her. He knew that, eventually, she would have to face those realities, and he could not protect her from everything. All he could do was prepare her, guide her, and stand by her side. They spent the morning completing small chores together. The sun warm on their backs as they fed the horses and repaired a small section of fence damaged by melting snow. Yana moved with careful precision, her confidence evident in the way she handled tasks without needing instructions. Yet, John noticed occasional pauses, moments when her thoughts seemed far away. She was thinking about what lay ahead, about family, about freedom, and about the difficult choices she would have to make. He realized that these moments of reflection were as important as any lesson he could teach her. They were helping her prepare emotionally for the challenges to come. That afternoon, they sat together on the porch, drinking warm tea and looking out over the ranch. John decided it was time for a serious conversation. "Ayana," he began gently, "you've grown so much since the day you came here. You're brave, clever, and thoughtful, but the world outside this cabin is waiting. You need to be ready to make decisions for yourself." She listened, her eyes wide, her hands wrapped around the warm cup of tea. "I know," she whispered. I just don't know if I can do it." John smiled softly, squeezing her hand. "You can. You've already shown me how strong you are, and whatever happens, I'll be here to help you." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of trust, experience, and unwavering support. Over the next few days, John helped Ayana organize her belongings. He showed her how to pack efficiently, how to carry what she needed, and how to keep herself prepared without drawing attention. Yana watched and learned carefully, absorbing every detail, but John also noticed her small acts of independence, adjusting her backpack, choosing what to keep, thinking through her steps. She was growing into her own strength, learning the balance between caution and action. And John felt a mixture of pride and concern. He knew that her independence was necessary, but it also meant that she would face the world without his constant presence. One afternoon, a visitor came to the edge of the property again, a friendly official who had been searching for Ayana. John greeted him politely and explained that she was safe and that they had been discussing her next steps. Ayana stood quietly behind John, her gaze shifting between the man and the horizon beyond the cabin. When John gently invited her to speak, she took a deep breath and stepped forward, her voice steady but soft. She thanked him for his kindness, for his protection, and for the lessons he had taught her. The words surprised John, not because of their content, but because of the courage it took for her to speak them aloud. This was a turning point, a moment when she began to understand that she could face the world while holding onto the lessons she had learned at the ranch. The days that followed were filled with preparation, planning, and reflection. John and Ayana walked the perimeter of the property together, discussed how to navigate interactions with family and officials, and practiced small routines for calm and vigilance. Ayana began to internalize everything he taught her, combining careful observation with thoughtful decision-making. She was growing into a young person capable of facing challenges without fear. Yet John knew that no matter how prepared she became, the process of reintegrating into the world would be emotionally complex. She would encounter difficult conversations, conflicting feelings, and choices that would test her courage. And he hoped that the bond they had built would help her navigate these trials. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Ayana sat by the fire sketching in her notebook. John watched her for a moment, noting how the shadows played across her face, how her hands moved confidently across the page, and how her mind seemed absorbed in thought. Then she looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. "John," she said softly, "I think I'm ready." Her voice carried determination, tempered with a touch of uncertainty, but it was clear that she had reached a point of emotional strength. John smiled, feeling a deep sense of relief and pride. He had guided her, taught her, and protected her, but now it was time for her to take the next steps on her own journey. The following day, they prepared to leave the cabin together and meet Ayana's family and the officials who had been searching for her. She packed carefully, double-checking her belongings and taking a few items she had grown attached to during her stay. John offered quiet guidance, ensuring that she had everything she needed, but he allowed her to make choices independently. Each decision she made was a small victory, a reflection of the lessons she had absorbed and the strength she had developed. The cabin, once a place of uncertainty and caution, had become a school of courage, resilience, and trust. When the moment came to leave the ranch, Ayana took a deep breath and stepped outside. The sun was warm on her face, the wind gentle, and the air filled with the sounds of life awakening after the long winter. John walked beside her, offering quiet reassurance but allowing her to move forward independently. They approached the vehicle waiting at the edge of the property, and Ayana turned to John. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and sadness. John nodded, feeling a lump in his throat but also a profound sense of pride. "You're ready," he said simply. "Remember everything we've shared. You're stronger than you know." She smiled faintly and stepped forward, ready to face the next chapter of her life. The journey to meet her family was quiet but filled with reflection. Ayana sat by the window, her sketchbook in her lap, reviewing the maps and notes she had created during her stay at the ranch. She thought about the lessons John had taught her, the importance of observation, patience, courage, and careful decision-making. She realized that the world outside the cabin would present challenges, but she also understood that she had gained the tools to navigate them. John rode quietly beside her, offering support when needed, but respecting her growing independence. It was a delicate balance, one that reflected the deep trust and connection they had built over weeks of shared experiences. When they arrived at the reservation, Ayana's family was waiting. The reunion was emotional, filled with tears, hugs, and quiet apologies. Her grandmother embraced her tightly, expressing love and relief, while her siblings looked on with curiosity and warmth. John observed from a distance, feeling a mix of pride, relief, and sadness. He had played a crucial role in helping Ayana navigate a difficult time, but he knew that her life would continue without him by her side. Yet he also understood that she was ready to reconnect with her family, to face her past, and to move forward with the courage she had developed at the ranch. In the days that followed, John returned to the cabin, reflecting on the journey they had shared. He thought about the lessons he had learned alongside Ayana, the importance of patience, trust, resilience, and kindness. He realized that helping someone in need was never simple, but it was deeply rewarding. He had watched a frightened, cautious girl grow into a confident, thoughtful young person, capable of facing the complexities of the world. And he knew that, though their paths were now diverging, the bond they had formed would remain a lasting source of strength for both of them. As spring continued to spread across the plains, the cabin felt both empty and full, empty without Ayana's presence, but full with the memories of laughter, learning, and courage. John tended to the ranch, the routines now infused with a sense of purpose and reflection. He understood that life was rarely simple, that every act of kindness carried responsibility, and that trust and courage were among the most valuable gifts one could give or receive. And in the quiet moments, he often thought of Ayana, imagining her walking with confidence, facing the world with strength, and carrying the lessons of their time together wherever she went. Looking back, John realized that the winter that had brought Ayana to his door was more than just a season. It was a turning point, a time of growth, learning, and emotional transformation. Both of them had faced challenges, uncertainty, and fear, but they had also shared joy, discovery, and the quiet power of trust. In the end, the story was not about the cold, the snow, or even the challenges they faced. It was about the courage to care, the patience to guide, and the wisdom to know that life's complexities could be met with kindness, resilience, and understanding. And as the sun set over the ranch, casting long golden shadows across the fields, John smiled quietly to himself, knowing that sometimes letting someone in from the cold was only the beginning of a journey that would shape both their lives forever.